we're born into those various different preconceived notions and ideologies. These various different tropes and stereotypes existed before we existed. Looking around, and the only picture or only way I could identify with anything, it was a picture of Bob Marley on the wall, and that was it.
Beautiful capturing of like turning pain into purpose.
Hey, think about the language you use and ask yourself why you use that.
The way when you're speaking, I'm just like, Jahnine, are you in my brain?
Hello and welcome back to the Social Matters podcast. We are three social workers talking about social matters. Hi, I'm Eugene.
Hi, I'm Fran.
Hi, I'm Nadia.
And we are joined, like this, let's just take a moment there, right now. Like I need to take a deep breath and drink some water. Outtakes, you don't see the outtakes. Better. But we are joined by the brilliant Jahnine Davis. Welcome to the podcast. You know what? I was gonna ask how you are. Could you tell me about your journey in today? So, but just generally, how are you?
Too soon.
I shouldn't be laughing.
Too soon.
But how are you? Welcome to the podcast. How are
you.
you generally?
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm good. I'm really good. You know, blocking out my journey in, I feel really good. I can't, life is good. Yeah. Busy as always, but good all the same.
Good. And we really appreciate you taking time to come in because we know you're an incredibly busy person, and especially the journey that you took to come in. We really appreciate that even more. So we'll help you feel comfortable and safe. But we wanted to kind of bring you on to have a conversation about your work and adultification. But could you start by telling us a bit about who you are, introducing yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, I always, when I hear this question, I'm always like, gosh, where do I start? So, as you know, yes, my name's Jahnine Davis, and so I always say I've always been in the system, whether that's in relation to child protection and safeguarding, children's rights, and that was from my own experience of being a care experienced child, feeling very much frustrated about how I felt I was heard or not heard and not listened to, and I wanted to advocate for people who had similar experiences, and that's where it all started. And from there, I've worked within services, frontline, directly with children and young people who have experienced various forms of harm. I then moved into managing services, research, although I never thought I'd go into research, but I did. And now I have my company, Listen Up, which I'll be able to say a bit more about, and the work I do on adultification. And I mean, I hold lots of hats. I always think where to start, what to say. But I would say my standpoint very much in terms of where I'm from, what I'm about, is very much centered in lived experience, first and foremost, and ensuring that we don't just say, we want to consult, that we truly mean what we say, which is bringing the voices and experiences of children at the fore. And I would say that's the core part of me, which has always remained, and that's where my work on adultification comes in, I guess, is I always want to ensure we truly understand what lived experiences are for children in our systems, to ensure that we advocate for them as best as possible.
You know what? You're one of those people that I feel, I feel there's a select number of people in the world that get given the ability to freeze time. So they could do way more than what a normal human being. When you're just telling me all the stuff you do, I'm like, do you freeze time? How do you have the time to do all of that? Tell us the secret.
I don't. I don't. I'm busy.
Yeah.
I'm busy, but if I'm honest, it's because I really do care and really enjoy what I do. And I always say to myself, if there comes a time where I just get a bit, what's the word, nonchalant?
Yeah.
Then I think it's time for me to pause, step back and review. But at the moment, I've still got energy.
Yeah.
And I want to use the energy to do the best as I possibly can. Yeah, I think I care. But then I guess that comes with different challenges, doesn't it? Because when you care so much and you're bringing in lived experience, it has its, there are your advantages, but also challenges, because sometimes you then forget to look after yourself, and you normalize, or you can end up normalizing some of the really difficult and traumatizing and challenging conversations we have about safeguarding, about harm. So, don't want to go too much because I know you've got other questions you want to ask. But I am still here, and I say, I'm in my 40s now.
Look at
way.
No way.
Thank you. I'm glad. Look at that. I'm coming back here every time. But somebody knocked, literally. I was, I think I just turned 14 and I had a knock on my door at my children's home, and it was a social work lecturer from the University of the West of England. I'm from Bristol originally, although you can't hear my accent. I am. And she knocked on my children's home door asking if there are any care experienced children who would be willing to come to the university and speak to second year social workers about what it is to be care experienced, some of the challenges, the importance of working together with social workers, thinking about relational practice. And at the time I wasn't in education. I thought, why not? I didn't have anything to lose. And that's how I got involved. And from there, I myself with I think 6 other care experienced children and young people from across the country came together and her name's Dr. Jane Dalrymple. I always want to call out her name because honestly, I mean, she is still in my life. She is like a second mother to me, and she really believed in me and seen more than just this care experienced child. She's seen me and all my possibilities I could bring. And along with Jane and other colleagues, Kate Gledhill from Children's Rights Officers and Advocates, we developed a toolkit called Total Respect. And it was the first ever training programme, which was co-developed by care experienced young people and social workers. And we went out delivering this training programme. It was compulsory at the time. All social workers had to undertake the training, and we delivered it across the country. And at the time I was like, 14, 15, 16 out and about doing that. So I feel I almost had one step in the world of reality and trauma and just a lot. But then I also had this door, just a crack open where I could peek into different opportunities. And I'm just grateful that I had that opportunity to do that. And here I am, and here I stay, it seems.
Lovely.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jahnine.
Thank you so much. And just, love hearing about the work. And when you said all those different hats, I can almost see so many different, balanced on your head. And you sort of started to talk about it then, I guess, about that almost sliding doors moment and that opportunity. What else is it, do you think, about your experiences that has sort of led you into this work?
I think ultimately my experience of being a black girl in care in an area where no one looked like me, the staff didn't look like me, although they tried their very best to support me, and just knowing how it felt to not be seen and to feel isolated, not to be understood, I feel was a sticking point for me. And I felt throughout life I was always probably fighting a lot to be heard, and my experiences being, misconstrued or reframed in a way which didn't sit with the reality of what I was actually experiencing or what I was trying to present. And that feeling of hearing the same things over and over again, and at different points in life, there are different ways in which we talk about children's experiences. And I feel we're saying the same things. We just find different ways to say and talk about the same issue. So for me growing up, it was children's rights and participation. Now we're talking about co-production. But we've been talking about the importance of bringing children's voices and experiences in forever. And I feel that for me, because I wasn't seen, because I do understand how it feels not to be heard, but I also have the experience of knowing what it is like to be seen, and that's what I want to be a part of, So I would say my life has been colourful for me. I've lived a very colourful life. I won't say too much, but I've experienced, obviously the reason as to why I'm in care, there's going to be reasons. And I've experienced a lot of trauma in life. And I do feel that has, although in some way it's the thing which caused me much grief and pain, it's also the thing which has led me into this space. And I try not to forget that. But yeah, I would say that's why I'm here on my background. And seeing other children, I think about those young people I was talking about earlier in terms of total respect, some I'm still in touch with, and just knowing what our journeys have been. And sometimes I question, did it have to be so difficult? Did it have to be so hard?
Just such a beautiful capturing of like turning pain into purpose, like doing something with the kind of, you know, difficulties and straight up pain that you've kind of experienced, and doing something purposeful with that.
I think so. And I remember, and why I always will talk about the intersections of me being not just, you know, a girl in care, but a black girl. It was so important. I remember in my children's home going in with a bin bag, having nothing but whatever I had in there, and looking around, and the only picture or only way I could identify with anything, it was a picture of Bob Marley on the wall, and that was it. And there were no shops close to me which had, you know, hair care products. I was in an area in Bristol which, you know, at the time it was very racist. And I was now in this space which is supposed to feel safe but actually felt so unsafe. And again, for me, I'm like, okay, I guess that feeling, or that knowing what that feels like, I do believe I think it makes me question a lot in terms of what does safety look like when you are a child, regardless of what your background is. But when you are a child and you are sitting in or positioned within various different intersections and you're experiencing harm, you've experienced various traumas, and now you're in a space like this, which is supposed to reflect safety, but actually creates a different level of, you know, feeling psychologically unsafe as well as physically unsafe. What does that look like for you? And I was, I can't remember how old, in my children's home, and that was the first ever time I had, the police were called on me. And it was because I had run away. And I remember that feeling of, now I can frame it in a different way of, I was being criminalised. I felt I was being criminalised. I wasn't provided with, I didn't feel like nurture or care. It felt like a very punitive response, or a lack of understanding of, well, getting to the why is Jahnine, why is a child running away from this children's home? And it was because I didn't feel like home. I felt confused, I felt angry, I felt upset. And we know, you know, thinking about what that means now and how we talk about it, we know a lot of care experienced children experience that sense of criminalisation and aren't afforded the types of experiences many children living in their familial homes experience, such as I'm having a time out and it's too much. But for me, being criminalised within the place which is supposed to feel safe was, you know, difficult. But I'm going on, but I guess the point why I'm saying all of this is because these are the various different experiences which have, as I said, led me to where I am.
Yeah, and you kind of you were just speaking to there of like, being criminalised, where maybe the same behaviour is seen very differently to children who aren't kind of in care. And it's very, I suppose, I was going to say adult way, but I don't know if it's the right way, but basically treated as much older than you were, like calling the police because the child's not at home. Like it feels like, you were being adultified. And I think that the question that we know that you've done a piece of research into adultification that was published in 2019. Could you just define what adultification is and kind of also speak to the research and what the findings were?
Yes. So adultification means where children are perceived as being more adult-like, or they're ascribed adult-like characteristics. And whilst that's happening, in the other side of that is this erasure of the inherent vulnerability all children have, where they are perceived as being more culpable, more responsible. We see that whether that's based on the ways in which we talk about children, whether it's about them being, you know, hyper resilient, strong, streetwise, and we use that language rather than thinking about, actually, one, is that what we're seeing? Is it how our various different, you know, stereotypes and perceptions of children are at the forefront, which therefore reduce our ability to question what that behaviour might be indicative of. So adultification ultimately means where children are not afforded vulnerability, and vulnerability therefore becomes a bit of a privilege. It's not just the everyday experience you have. Adultification means that we have a reduction in curiosity, whether it's individual or organisational. Adultification means that, as I said, we're more likely to have a punitive response. We're more likely to view children through a lens of suspicion. Adultification means that we erase or erode the rights of children to be protected from harm, because our focus is on criminality, especially those who sit within the intersection of both. And adultification ultimately means that children do not get to thrive in the ways in which they deserve to, because our focus is on pathologizing them and seeing them as an issue rather than trying to get behind and underneath what might be the factor. And it was 2019 I undertook a master's in women and child abuse. And at the time, I wanted to do something specifically focused on Black girls, as I felt there wasn't much research in the UK specifically focusing on Black girls and child sexual abuse. And at the time, I also remember being that really irritating student. I mean, I'm really good friends with my lecturer now, and I'm sure if she listens or watches in, she'll be like, yes, I'm still getting over, because every minute my hand was going up and like, excuse me. So what does this mean about Black girls? Because I found a lot of the research was focused on North American literature, and therefore it made me question, yes, there are going to be commonalities and similarities, but there are also distinct differences. So how are we assured that we truly do understand the experiences of what it is like to be a Black girl and a Black girl who is victimised by CSA? So that research meant that I went out speaking to various different professionals who are working within the CSA space.
Just to say...
Child sexual abuse, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
And I wanted specifically to focus on Black British Caribbean. And intrafamilial, so harm within the home, so child sexual abuse within the home environment. And adultification was one of the features, one of the findings which came up, and the belief that Black girls, because of the various different tropes which exist, strong, angry, even though we say the angry Black woman, that caricature Patricia Collins talked about, controlling images, actually it's that we're born into those various different preconceived notions and ideologies. These various different tropes and stereotypes existed before we existed. We know that they are steeped in colonization and enslavement, and were used as a means to justify the various harms Black women and girls experienced, such as sexual abuse and other forms of sexual violence. So what was really interesting in the research is that it basically just said, well, we can still see how, when we talk about history, it's not history assumes that it's something in the past and no longer, in existence. When actually what we do know is that these various different harmful narratives of Black girls somehow being more sexually aware, hypersexual, more able, more aggressive, difficult, but yet when it comes to vulnerability, this hyper invisibilization. So invisibilized when it comes to vulnerability, Jahnine, hyper-visibilized.
We were making words up for one of our previous...
I do this a lot. I have these words and I'm like, oh, yes, I like that.
Yeah, someone made up words, so why can't
Doesn't it sound good? But the point is, what was really difficult in that research was, it was some of the narratives of, speaking to one colleague, and she said, actually... She was acknowledging that when I'm speaking, I know there are going to be various victim survivors, as I have, share this. But she was talking about her own experience of being abused, sexually abused, and saying, well, I was 14 at the time, actually, and no one believed me. And I went to the police and they wouldn't believe me. They just assumed, well, it happens in your community. It's just normal. And that's not new. We know that's not new because from the work of Marlene Bogle, Brixton Black Women's Project, 1988, published a paper talking about some of the various different beliefs and ideas about Black girls and child sexual abuse. But again, going off on a tangent, but the point around where adultification came in is we're talking about children, and if children are being perceived as somehow being inherently more adult-like, more able, more, when we say resilience, and some people, especially within the social work space, we see resilience as a positive thing, and we have good intention behind it. But I always question, well, what does resilience mean if it comes with no choice? Yeah. If there is just this idea that you're hyper strong and you've got this strength from nowhere, so therefore you can get on with it. For a lot of Black girls, vulnerability is the experience they have been excluded from, and they've been assumed to always be strong, and therefore where adultification sits in that was that these girls were not being not only identified as being in need, at risk of harm, experiencing harm, but it meant that they also were unable to sometimes acknowledge the harms that they had experienced because they had just had that perception of, well, we just have to get on with it. So there was, that coming out through the research.
Fascinating research, really, really fascinating. Thank you for capturing it so beautifully.
Yeah. Where can people access your research? Because just as I was listening to you speak, I was like, I need to read this. Is it
I feel like I need to now this is where I just look down in shame.
Well,
Look down at your lovely trainers.
I look at my trainers as I point them closer and closer to the camera.
Camera too.
Okay, thank you. No, so I published it at the time because, being completely honest, I found it so overwhelming and difficult. As it was just a lot to take in myself, and I published it initially via community care, and it's called "Where Are the Black Girls in Our Child Sexual Abuse Statistics," etc. And then and that brings some of my research, to light in there. And then I also published via Black Ballad, which is an online publishing platform for Black women. And I wrote about some of the challenges I found researching child sexual abuse, particularly as a Black woman, being a researcher and talking about child sexual abuse in relation to the communities I reflect and come from, and the challenge that I found. So that's published. It is online, but it's just that I ever gone as deep as I probably could have and should have done? No. And I think that was probably out of, at the time, if I'm honest, I think I found it really quite traumatizing. And, I always say the one thing what stood out for me with that research, which to give you some insight, was when someone said to me devaluation came out significantly. Black women and girls not feeling valued. And I remember when one participant said, well, Black girls aren't perceived as being beautiful, so in some way be grateful for the abuse.
Wow.
And it was hearing that as a victim survivor myself, hearing that as a mother of, a daughter, hearing that as just a human being, I found that really difficult to swallow. In terms of what are we doing, what are the messages we're sending out there, where you have somebody say, because of the societal messages that Black women and girls aren't beautiful, we don't, tick the box of whatever, your eccentric standard of beauty looks like, be grateful for child sexual abuse, That was very difficult to hear. But that was a real experience and a real reality for these people I was speaking to. So yes, you can find my publication online. It's still online. I did write an updated version of the article. And I'm saying this, although I feel like when I say it out loud, it means I'm going to have to actually continue to write it. An article which has been in the waiting. Again, I can feel my lecturer just staring, looking at me, being like, Jahnine, we've been waiting for this for a long time. And I am due to publish quite soon a paper out of that research. Just I needed a break from it.
Of course. Yeah, I can imagine. Really powerful stuff. And thank you for sharing. I think just hearing it is powerful, but to actually experience it and hear it firsthand from the people and victim survivors is, I can more than understand why you need to take time out. Thank you very much, Jahnine, for sharing that. And just thinking about a lot of our audience are social workers and professionals working with young people. So through your lens of adultification, what are the 3 key messages you would want them to take away from your work?
I would say, I think there's just something about being honest and giving yourselves permission to talk about difference, to talk about the things which we feel uncomfortable about and we're not sure why. And I say that particularly where you're working with somebody who is from a different background to you, and we talk about bias, unconscious, conscious bias, we talk about this all day, but ultimately we're talking about, for me, getting to grips with, we're talking about difference and fear and a worry of saying the wrong thing. And I think, you know, adultification, so to be clear, any child can experience adultification. We know that, the research tells us this. We just know that Black children are most likely to experience this harm. And when Black children do experience it, it is a manifestation of racism. And therefore, I do worry sometimes when we talk about adultification and how it's become a kind of more of a buzzword as of late. I think it's important to say racism. We're talking about racism, and if we're able to just say the word racism, I think that's quite freeing, because then we're not hiding behind language. We're not saying our cultural competence and everything else. We say we're talking about racism. So I would say for any social worker, first and foremost, to be open about your own biases and to feel able to talk about them, and to ensure that you're in a workspace or in a space where you can be reflective, you can have those sometimes challenging and difficult conversations. I'd also say think about the language you use and ask yourself why you use that. I always say, you know, I think I was around 25 when I accessed my files, and there was no one to go back to. Social workers had moved on, and I remember reading these ways people just described me, and I was like, that wasn't me. Or I was actually just, I was scared, I was hurt, I was angry, you know, all of these emotions, but there was no way to go back and address that. So I always think to myself, how do we hold ourselves accountable individually? How are we assured that you're able to say what you mean rather than just say a word? Because that language can stick, and it does stick for children, particularly from Black and minoritized backgrounds, and how that feeds in or further exacerbates various different beliefs and ideas about what it is to be a Black child. So I do think there is a real responsibility to ensure that you're not just using language, that you're being explicitly clear on describe what you're talking about. And that sounds really basic. And I do think sometimes we can over-egg, like, adultification. I'm like, go back to basics. We're talking about how you speak, how you talk about children. How do we rehumanize ourselves so we don't dehumanize children? And I would say another message, I think it's more for me about our systems, and it's difficult because I do think if I look at just social workers, I think it takes context away from the context and then the conditions in which social work practice is steeped in, where social work comes from. So I think it's about how leaders, how we reflect on our policies, our guidance. It's not just, a message for a social worker. For me, it's a message for the system, and it's a message for how we come together, really meaningfully come together to work together, not in a way which is, you know, where there's tension, in a way which truly is cohesive, in a way which allows for interagency challenge, because I think it's very easy to talk about what they're doing over there or what they're not doing, or that agency blaming, but actually how do we invite scrutiny? I think there's something about inviting scrutiny, inviting challenge, but we need to be able to hold that. And I feel, as I'm saying this, as I'm literally just, as I said, writing my final just chapters on this, my thesis, and some of the things that's really made me reflect on is just how much blame there is in our system, and that whether you're talking about adultification, whether you're talking about classism, whether you're talking about assumptions of poverty, whatever it is you're talking about, where there is so much blame, it's difficult for social workers, it's difficult for any professional to be vulnerable and to say, I've messed up or I'm not sure. And therefore, I think that's even more so when you talk about issues related to race. So it's to call out to social workers, but it's actually a call to action for our senior leaders. How do you give social workers permission to be their vulnerable selves? How do you give social workers permission to really use their curiosity rather than feeling like you have to follow this kind of linear process, which is quite binary? And how do we ensure that when we talk about race, we don't just talk about it as in a reactive way? There is a tendency to talk about race when we have high profile cases. You know, it's like, oh, we need to now talk about this. We can go back to talking about Jasmine Beckford, Tyra Henry, Victoria Climbié, now Child Q. There were various different points throughout our time across safeguarding where we've had this kind of, oh, we need to act. And I just think we need to just find a way to be more consistent, you know, so that we don't always become reactive when actually we already know what's happening in our systems around how we safeguard or do not safeguard certain groups of children. And I've gone beyond adultification just because adultification is a part of it, but it's not the whole issue. It's a part of the issue.
Thank you so much. I could listen to you all day. It's so interesting and so many kind of things to think about and resonating. And one, I think when you were talking about so much blame, and there is, isn't there? And I think it's almost like to hold the gaze up at oneself is too much. So I think people push elsewhere. And it really resonated of that kind of being able to show their authentic vulnerability. I think we talk about authentic self, but part of that is that psychological safety to be vulnerable, which is so key. And another thing that really just was so important is naming the racism in it, because I think the adultification is sort of the byproduct of the conditions of racism. And I think, as you said, if professionals working in that field are just using adultification, the naming, the buzzword, what is it that got us to that? And I think it's so important. So that is a really important kind of resonation for me of what is happening in the racism, the biases, you know, the conditions that lead to adultification. So yeah, really important to name that, to be able to unpick it.
And also when we talk about adultification, I think there's a tendency to talk about it in the context of adolescent safeguarding. No, we need to be talking about it in terms of, understand it's a continuum, you know, understand it as what we need to think about in terms of early years plus, but also, because I think my worry is it's easier to talk about adultification more when it comes to adolescence, and it tends to be used in the context of extrafamilial harm, where it's, oh, there's adultification. When I published a paper with my colleague back in 2020, Boys to Men, the Cost of Adultification, 2 Black British Caribbean boys who, even though years apart, mirrored almost, you could felt like you're reading about the same child in terms of the experiences, criminal exploitation, neurodiversity, policing, criminal justice response, not necessarily a response we're seeing what we would hope to see from children's social care, as well as other agencies. So in that context, I think it's quite easy to talk about adultification, but I'm thinking about adultification, thinking about one case I have in my mind now where a child at the time, 8 years old, being called manipulative, being called aggressive, difficult. She was a child. And why are we using that language? Why is that language, you know, okay? And I think where we're so used to just, not through blame, but just where within the ways in which we speak or our own burnout, we can just become quite just, we just use language and we don't really ever, when do we have the time to just pause and reflect in terms of, well, what does this language mean? But I would say, I would want to see a better understanding of adultification in early years and understand the journey. Really, you know, for me, a standout paper in 2017, Black Girl Erasure, piece of research in North America, looking at, it was a comparative study, looking at how professionals, they were asked the same questions in terms of how they perceive Black girls in comparison to how they perceive white girls. And professionals said from the age of 5 upwards, Black girls were being described as being in less need of nurture, more adult-like, age 10 upwards, more, sexual, etc., in comparison to white girls. So if we're only focusing on just the higher end, we're missing some of, for me, that from age 5. And if we understand Maslow's hierarchy of need, we're saying somehow Black children are void of that. They don't fit within that. And that's where dehumanization comes into this. And again, if we understand the history of colonization and enslavement, that's why you cannot, whether we like it or not, whether it's uncomfortable or not, you cannot exclude or separate or detach the impact of colonization and where we are now, because those narratives of being less need of nurture, being hypersexual, it's going back to those various different tropes about the hypersexual, animalistic Black woman and girl, etc. So that's why we can't just be only focusing on it at certain pinpoints. We need to be understanding that it's on a continuum, and then it just continues into adulthood. We don't call it adultification. At that point, you're just talking about racism.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thanks, Jahnine.
Thank you so much. And I guess just back to one of the previous questions when you were talking about the research you did and the emotional impact of that in terms of your own lived experience and then researching that as well. What do you do to kind of navigate that and to kind of look after yourself, given that, you know, the emotional toll will likely kind of impact you?
Yeah. I was going to lie and be like, I, do all of these activities. I think I'm learning and relearning. And I think that's something probably for all professionals working in the sector. We're very good at telling others what they should do, or speaking to the children and families about what we think they should be doing, but how you actually adopt that learning for yourself is a very different story. And I've had way too many instances where I'm like, why am I so exhausted? Is that another grey hair I see on my hairline? What is going on? And that's when I realised, oh no, okay, I'm reaching burnout again. So I think I've had to really find ways to listen to my body. And if I'm completely honest, being really just raw, I think some of you will know or not know, or I think you'll know. I was diagnosed with breast cancer about, not last year, the year before last. And if I'm honest, that was almost my moment in time where self-care, I just couldn't ramp. That was like, how? No way. And I remember it forced me to stop. It forced me to say no. And although it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, it was an experience which has almost set my benchmark of, Jahnine, do not play around. Take care of yourself. It's okay to say no. It's okay to turn down opportunities. Another door will open. It's okay. You can't save the world, and I think I realize, just even as I'm saying it now, thinking of all the different hats I hold, I'm having to be really conscious about the things I take on. So I would say what I do now, I say no a lot. I allow myself to feel and feel okay. I think there is that, especially as a black woman, myself, where I feel this like, oh, I've got to just be best of the best of the best. I'm like, no, I don't. Who told you that? Like, rest, relax, cry, scream. It's okay to be vulnerable. And if that vulnerability might look slightly, okay, are we worried about Jahnine? That's okay, because I think I used to go to, Reformer, Pilates. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. And I'd be like, I'm just going to go to Reformer. And I'm like, Jahnine, you're lying to yourself, because actually I'm like, you're exhausted. So what are the other ways I can fill my cup when I feel like it's literally just dry? So now I say no. I spend time with my children. That has been a thing for me in terms of ensuring that my children don't work around work, but it works around them. Sleeping. Do you not ever have those moments where I literally, again, I'm like, Jahnine, why am I like this? Because I wasn't like this as a child. I definitely wasn't. I did not want to go to school. But now I'll be like, I feel anxious that I'm not doing something. I'm like, I should be out there. No, 100. You should be in your bed.
100.
In your bed.
The way when you're speaking, I'm just like, Jahnine, are you in my brain?
I was thinking that, and the only reason I say, if you don't mind me saying, is because Laddie had a lie-in this Saturday at 10 a.m, and it was probably the first since I've known you. So when you were speaking, I was like, babes, have your lie-in.
It's such a thing, and I loved what you were saying about you saying no a lot. A sentence that I learned from someone that changed my life. No can be a complete sentence.
Do you know?
No, full stop.
No.
Not no because, actually I've got this going on. Or no because,
don't over-explain.
No, just no.
No.
Do you want to do this thing?
No.
And full stop.
Do you know how
changed
good?
my life.
I'm not going to lie. As of late, people have been like, Jahnine, you're looking quite good.
Yeah, go on, Jahnine.
Oh, really? Yeah. Because I've been saying no.
Yeah.
It's because I've been saying no. But what my lesson, I'm not saying this is in a way to, blame myself. Absolutely not. But what my lesson in terms of where you're met with a life-altering situation is you know, actually along the way, I could hear my body was telling me, no, I'm tired. Jahnine, just be still. And now, obviously that was not the cause, but my point is how I stopped listening and that I just normalized burnout. I normalized just feeling tired and looking secretly concerning. Absolutely not. That is just not my portion. No. I did. I normalized looking concerning and feeling rough and tired and then snappy and miserable at home and then not being able to provide the kind of attention I need, my children need. And I'm like, no, just say no. So that's my self-care. No.
I love that. And we talked about in the podcast rest as resistance, but also like capitalism that forces us to be in this like machine and actually stop, pause, rest.
And the thing that you said about not noticing or like not listening to your body, you know, the body keeps the score. There's an incredible book.
It really does.
Bessel van der Kolk that kind of talks about that, and in terms of like trauma as well. But if you're not listening to your body will make you listen in some way, shape or form. Like it will make you listen, but it's the importance of noticing it from early, I think is so important.
It is.
And thank you for being honest about self-care.
Yes.
I know you said I was gonna lie. But I think that like to different degrees and for different reasons, I think that will hit a chord with listeners, because I think you touched on it, who come into this kind of profession and we don't just go and work from a manual or textbook. We're bringing in some or part of our lived experience into the work, and it means something. So I feel that the strain on people in this field is more so than the pressures of working a job that's not connected with your lived experience. So then even more so, like the importance of self-care, the importance of saying no, the importance of resistance to kind of being the superhero is more pronounced, I think, and should be more pronounced.
And I also think that's why it's important you find your circle of people that you can lean on, they can lean on you, and that you're not just doing it by yourself. I'm really grateful that within the sector I've got, I've made some really amazing friends, I feel quite blessed actually, that I'm not, I sometimes you can feel like you're alone, but I have to sometimes just remind myself to pop my head up and look around and know that you've got people to lean on. Stop trying to take on the world. You don't need to.
Thank you, Jahnine. I was just saying, I don't know if it'll make the take, but when I listen to you speak, it feels so powerful, so informative, a little bit like a lecture, and I'm a little bit like a lecture, like you're lecturing me. No, but like as an informative. But it's so informative. Zoom in, camera one. But no, thank you. It's been such a great episode, and to listen to you and what you're doing, and for you to share your knowledge and your experiences with people, I think it's got to really slap and hit home with people. So thank you very much for coming on. If people wanted to find out more about your work, where can they find out?
So you can access our webpage at Listen Up, www.listenupresearch.org, or you can just drop us an email, hello@listenupresearch.org.
Lovely, thank you very much. We have been 3 social workers with the wonderful Jahnine Davis, and we've been talking about adultification. You can find us on Instagram at Matters Podcast, on LinkedIn, Social Matters, and on our YouTube channel, the Social Matters Podcast. Please do like, share, and join the conversation and share this wide with different people. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.